are we at in society today? Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
Hey everybody, welcome to the I'm a Man, I'm 40 deep dive discussion of Season 1, Episode 1 of Columbo, starring Peter Falk as a bumbling, lovable, cigar-chomping detective. This episode also stars Martin Milner as Jim Ferris, Rosemary Forsyth as his wife Joanna, Barbara Colby as the amazing Lily Lasenka, and Jack Cassidy, unbeknownst to me prior, Jack Cassidy as Ken Franklin. All right, so before I go any further into this, I want to introduce my co-host for today. First up, we've got a guy who always wears a trench coat in sunny Los Angeles. It's Paul Sykes.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Yeah, good, man. How are you doing today?
No, I'm doing really good, and I can't believe I'm going to say this. I didn't think I'd say this until I was in a retirement home, but I'm really looking forward to talking about Columbo today.
I'm surprised. We haven't spoken since the idea for this came up, and we actually both watched the episode. So I really have no idea what your take on it is. We should explain why we're even doing this, because most people, and by most people, I mean 7 people, know us from our James Bond deep dive discussions. So we're branching out from that today with a guy who, coming in live from London, is actually the 3rd partner of a successful murder mystery novel writing team. It's Paul Murphy. Paul, how are you?
Hi, yeah, good evening. Yeah, no, very well, thank you. And quite excited to be talking about Columbo with anybody at all, because it's not something many people have agreed to do before.
So the majority of people
excited.
that you're used to talking about Columbo with are probably dead now, right?
Oh, yeah, all gone. It's actually, sort of seriously, some dead relatives.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
So why don't we explain the premise for our conversation here? Because it's a bit of there are 1 billion things in the pop culture realm we could talk about. And I guess we looked at our audience and we saw, well, we're incredibly unpopular. How can we take a hit on that? How can we become even less popular and alienate more people? And I thought, well, why not jump in on Columbo? So we've been talking Bond with our man in London here, Paul Murphy. And he frequently makes obscure references to old Columbo episodes, which perplexes the rest of us. Now, Paul's opinions on Bond, while occasionally in stark disagreement with my own, are certainly very well reasoned. They're very insightful. And given our respect for Paul's opinions, we decided to get out of our wheelhouse a little bit and maybe talk some Columbo and figure out why the hell he likes it so much. I mean, I was with Paul in London recently, and we went around talking about James Bond and looking up various James Bond locations. And he couldn't help but mention every time there was some loose Columbo tie-in, and attempted to explain this to me. But so that's what we're going to be doing here today. Murph, do you want to give us your history then with Columbo and tell us about, like, what is it about Columbo that has made it such an unusual passion for someone who's not 70?
Sure. I wonder, really, I don't know how big Columbo is in general, but it seems, from looking online, it seems that there's an awful lot of stuff out there that's devoted around fan sites, what have you. So Columbo for me was something that I grew up with as a kid, and I associate it very much with being an elderly relative's place, one of my grandparents, and it was always on Saturday night at 8 o'clock. So it would always guarantee, and it's on a channel which had quite a lot of adverts, ITV. So it would always be 8 till 10. So it meant definitely as an 8-year-old boy, I was going to be staying up beyond 9 o'clock, maybe even beyond 10 o'clock to talk about the Columbo episode that we'd just seen.
What time frame are we in? What decade are we in? I don't know how old you are, Paul.
I'm late 80s. We're talking late 80s.
Yeah, okay.
And it would normally be the 70s episodes that would be on. So it was older episodes of Columbo that were broadcast in the UK in the 80s. And it was seen as sort of like an acceptable thing to have on the TV, an exciting thing to have on Saturday night, primetime, 8 o'clock. So that's how it all started. And I think it's because fundamentally I'm not that interested in murder mysteries. And this obviously isn't a whodunit concept. It's a how catch 'em concept. They show you everything at the beginning. They've normally introduced some really interesting characters. And they normally have Peter Falk obviously just rocks up at any point between 15 minutes and half an hour in. So there's normally quite a long lead in before he arrives. And when he arrives, obviously, it's quite formulaic. I mean, there's something comforting about the formula, just like James Bond. Very similar. Oh, okay, I know what's going to happen here. I don't need to be too concerned, but it's going to be a variation on a theme. Normally some really inventive murders. If you're lucky, and we'll come on to talk about this, but you get an episode where you have more than one murder, and that's a real treat. And yeah, that's it. I just associate them with happy, genuinely comforting Saturday nights in with my grandparents.
That's awesome. And during this time frame, the production period for Columbo was what? From early 70s to
Late 70s?
early 90s or something?
Go on, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think the first ever one, and I'm probably wrong on this, was the made-for-TV movie, which I think was 68, 69 kind of time, which was called Prescription Murder. And then they had another pilot, and then they introduced a TV series, and this is, I think, 1971. And they did a run of 7 series that were part of that original Columbo series. And then they kind of came back a good chunk later, like late 80s, early 90s. And those episodes are very ropey. A lot of them are very ropey, I think. And Peter Falk is very old.
Ropey meaning what in England?
Oh, sorry, ropey. Just a bit shit.
So Falk. This is the Diamonds Are Forever era. If you're drawing a comparison between Peter Falk and Sean Connery. Got it. Okay, now that's great. Thanks, Paul. What about you, Paul Sykes? Do you have any history whatsoever with Columbo? What did you think of when Murphy and I were like, hey, let's talk Columbo? Did you have any past to draw on, or do you have any sort of suppositions about what you were getting yourself into?
Okay, well, my entire history with Columbo is as follows. I would be watching something awesome like Perfect Strangers. And once it ended, you'd be trying to find like Elf on another channel, and you'd go past Columbo, and you'd be like, oh, it's old people doing things. And you'd quickly go past it, because in that episode of Elf, I'm sure he was going to try to eat the cat, which is always hilarious.
He doesn't eat the cat.
He never
the cat always gets away.
So that was my entirety of that. And the same could be said for Murder, She Wrote or Matlock. It's just something I skipped over. And so when I downloaded the file you guys wanted me to watch, I was like, oh God, an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to make Paul Murphy watch 50 episodes of Mr. Belvedere for revenge. But you know what? I was surprisingly entertained throughout the entire thing, and I can't wait to talk about it.
You guys are cracking me up. Okay, so for me, I may have seen an episode or two during my sort of 40 plus years of existence / pop culture consumption. I'm totally familiar with the basic premise of the show. Like all of the mannerisms of Columbo, I seem to have absorbed throughout my immersion in the pop culture zeitgeist for the last however many years. I'm familiar with the goofy bumbling detective, and I have some sort of what's the word for it, like a recognition and like a soft spot, I guess. Like it is comforting to see him, because he's like a very non-threatening guy, but I can't legitimately recall having ever sat before and watched an entire episode. And I think a lot of my Peter Falk memories are entirely Princess Bride related, and then I'm projecting that out over to this whole series. I also found it entertaining in a 1971 kind of way. So I think without further delay here, we'll get Murph to maybe give us a quick plot summary, and then we'll just go through the episode beat by beat, and we'll talk about. I have questions for Paul Murphy about Columbo, and maybe he can explain how the series sort of progresses. So Paul, walk us through the plot if you don't mind.
Okay, so obviously this is the first episode of the proper what's recognized as being Columbo, right? And
Sure.
This is a story that involves a writing partnership of Ken Franklin and Jim Ferris. Jim Ferris is clearly the guy that does all the work. Ken Franklin appears to have never really had any good writing ideas, apart from one we later find out about, and has basically sponged off his writing partner for a long time. He's living the high life. We can tell that he enjoys having sex with a lot of women, that's spending a lot of money at expensive restaurants, buying fine art, having a wonderful house, and he clearly likes chucking his money around. He likes gambling as well, we find out. His writing partner appears to be a much more kind of clean-cut sort of guy, clearly the guy that knows what he's doing. They've got this series of books called the Mrs. Melville series, like a murder mystery detective series, and Jim has decided he wants to pack it in. He wants to go off and do something more intellectual by the sounds of things, something that's a bit more solo work. And Ken is not at all happy with this. He does the obviously the only logical thing, which he sees as taking out an insurance policy and killing Jim. And he chooses to do it in an absolutely ironclad way of having an alibi by driving Jim to a remote location, i.e. a cabin down in San Diego, getting him to call his wife, tell his wife that he's actually at the office before he shoots him. Ken shoots Jim while Jim is on the phone, and his wife immediately assumes that, oh, Jim's been shot in the office. The police go off on a manhunt for whoever's shot Jim in his office without a body. And of course, Ken's got the ironclad alibi because he gets the call when he's in the cabin. So everyone knows where he was, that he was miles away when this all happened. And just as an extra layer of complexity to this already slightly ridiculous idea, Ken decides that he's going to say it must have been an organized hit job because Jim was doing a lot of research into organized crime. And the evidence of that is having some lists of criminals on a piece of paper in a desk.
So what I find interesting about this whole thing, I guess, is that as sort of we discussed earlier, there's no real mystery to what's going on here, right? I mean, we have a 10-minute, 15-minute preamble, which sets the stage quite slowly. And only at that point does Columbo appear, who is the star. He's out of it for an entire fifth quarter, whatever it is of the episode. And then Columbo arrives. And then I guess the rest of the show, it's just like, we're going to watch Columbo do his funny thing and figure out how he solves. We all know who the murderer is. We're just here to see Columbo do his thing. Is that the premise?
Yeah, it's a how catch him. We know we know what he's done. How on earth is Columbo going to catch him? It's too complicated. No detective can do this. But then Columbo surprises you because in his many clever ways. Number one, he seems to have an instinct for immediately knowing when somebody's suspicious. He zeroes in on the target where all the other police officers tend to miss. And
you don't
then
have to
just
be Columbo to figure out this guy.
Yeah. No, you don't. The way he acts from the get-go is so outrageous.
It's so over the top. It's Shatnerian in its
well, Shatner, of course, Shatner does turn up in 2 later episodes.
Well, it makes me want to watch those episodes now because he's the perfect guy. Like all these guys, these character guys who I think I'm looking at the list of people who show up to do this. They're like all very similar in terms of their range as actors and like, you know, their credentials. But so let's start up opening in what I assumed was Los Angeles at the time. It's Los Angeles, right?
Yep.
Okay. So is this where Columbo solves all of his crimes? Is he a Los Angeles detective and he never goes out to like Columbo in New York? Columbo goes to Cape Town. Columbo's in Rio. Like it's.
So in an episode, Dagger of the Mind, he does go to London. In an episode called A Matter of Honor, he does go to Mexico. He stumbles upon a murder in his Mexican holiday. And I believe there's another one I can't remember the name of, but he's on a cruise ship. And of course, Robert Vaughn is also on the cruise ship and chooses to murder somebody.
Robert Vaughn is in one of these? Of course he is. Of course he is. Of course Robert Vaughn is.
He's actually in 2 episodes. But
I was going to say, of course he's on a cruise ship because that's your target demographic right there.
What did you guys think of this? This is a very interesting way to open an episode where we have maybe 5 or 8 minutes of just typing and there's no score at all. It started to drive me crazy. Paul Sykes, what did you think of this?
You know, I kind of noticed the same thing that you did. I found it a little bit jarring, but after that, I kind of settled into it, and I thought it did a good job of kind of ratcheting up the tension a little bit. And I think that the fake murderer, the guy who goes in and says he's practical joking him, I thought that was a fairly effective way to start it. I didn't really know what to expect
Yeah.
because, like you guys alluded to earlier, I didn't know how this show proceeded.
Right.
I thought it would be like a CSI type thing or like a Law and Order where they give you like like a couple of suspects. I didn't know we'd watch the whole crime unfold and know exactly who did it. And I was kind of thinking, how are they going to get any tension out of this?
Mhm.
Right? But they did an effective job.
So still no music. He runs back upstairs. See, some of these things to me are so obvious where he's like, oh, hold on a second. I got to run back upstairs. And then he tosses the place, right? But he takes his sweet time doing it. Just, he's like so smug. He's grinning to himself the whole time. Like, I'm so clever, pushing books off the shelves and everything. Is there no...
It is also the 1970s classic trashing a room scene, isn't it? That it happens a lot when it's like, oh, somebody creates the impression of a place being burgled, and they always do the classic things of throwing paper everywhere, but never actually opening any of the drawers and doing anything. Knocking a chair over, because obviously that's what you'd be doing if you're desperately looking for a list. You'd knock a chair over. It doesn't make any sense. And like you say, he does it in such a brilliant camp villain fashion. I think at one point he even kind of brushes his lapel and grins at himself as with sort of self-satisfaction. It's brilliant, but yeah, completely ridiculous.
He's basking in his own deviousness, like he's so pleased with himself. And I find his performance, I mean, this is where I'm starting to get into the Jack Cassidy performance. A guy who I legitimately couldn't tell you prior to this anything that he had done, and I didn't recognize his work whatsoever, because I guess I've seen a lot of film and TV from that era, but not in a while. And he's a real like TV actor. He's like I'm going to be on the Love Boat this week if he hadn't died in a tragic house fire. So this is directed, we haven't mentioned, by Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
One of the first directorial outings of Steven Spielberg, where he was cranking out TV shows. Where was this? Paramount or Universal or something like that. Guys, did you, from the get-go, do you like these Steven Spielberg directing choices, or do you feel like he's doing a good job of directing here? Or do you feel maybe like I felt that even though I'm not very good at any of this media stuff, at this point, I've seen so many things that I could do a better job of directing this episode than Steven Spielberg. I do a better job of directing a trailer for a discussion of a trailer than Steven Spielberg did of directing this episode. But you guys, you tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay, I didn't actually know that Steven Spielberg directed this because you instructed me to do no research on this whatsoever before I watched it, so I knew nothing. And so when it came up at the end, I had to like make sure that it was actually Steven Spielberg and not like Senor Spielbergo, his non-union Mexican equivalent.
That's right.
But the one thing where I think he fails a little bit as a director, I don't know if this is the actor's choice or Spielberg's choice, is I would like the villain to present to Columbo less obvious. So Columbo would actually have to kind of solve something. And then Columbo could, with his barbs, could slowly wear down his facade and until he kind of unravels a little bit. I just thought he was always just so painfully obvious, the villain to Columbo.
Yeah. I happen to agree with that for sure. And Murphy, I'm kind of curious as like, I looked through the list of actors who are the murderers, and I figured this has to be the same premise for every single show, because all of these actors, none of them are known for their subtlety.
No. Some of them, there is a degree in this one, it's even more obvious than it normally would be, I think. I think there are definitely episodes where the villains manage to at least attempt to pretend to be sorry or shocked when they find out that somebody close to them has been horribly murdered. Jack Cassidy clearly he plays an incredibly arrogant character who has decided that he is untouchable in this situation because, as far as he's concerned, he's got an alibi and that's all that matters. And he's very happy to act arrogantly with the police because he assumes he's cleverer than they are. And he's probably right a lot of the time. But the difference, obviously, being Columbo becomes the trope, the impression of a bumbling, hopeless guy that doesn't really know what's going on, that can barely light his cigar, has to keep on asking questions and clarifications because he doesn't follow the train of thought. And Jack Cassidy is like, well, if this guy's, he's the best they've got and he's the one on the job, well, I'll just talk him through the steps and get him to do what I need him to do. And it's not until a good halfway through the episode that Jack Cassidy starts recognizing, okay, he's picking up on a few things here that are starting to worry me a little bit. So yeah, I think that but you're absolutely right to say that it is a classic trope within Columbo that the killer is normally pretty obvious.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Pretty obvious.
And so as far as the directing cues that we see here, I mean, is anyone watching this? So Paul Sykes is the only one who watched this not knowing it was Steven Spielberg. Are you watching it going like, wow, I can see Amistad in this. I can definitely see.
You know what? There was some really good uses of lighting. I found there was certain scenes where they really made like I forget the villain, that Ken and Lily just seemed ghoulish in certain scenes, like absolutely horrifying. And I thought like I could see kind of Spielberg's kind of horror beginnings from like Jaws there, I guess, thinking about it.
I think there are some absolutely the examples of angles and lighting that are used, particularly with Lily Lasanka and Ken Franklin. Between the two of them, that scene in the theatre, for example, where she grabs him and says, "We need to have a talk." That's actually quite a horrifying moment, and you really do feel scared for Ken for some reason. You suddenly side with him, thinking, "Oh my God, poor Ken! He's going to get caught out. His life's going to implode." The scene when Lily meets her fate is actually quite horrifying, and it's sort of quite classic horror, and it's hammed up, but it's very effective. There's some other lovely little bits I hadn't spotted, but I did rewatch this previous to this, obviously. And there's some great bits when Kent's down in his cabin and he's standing at his window, and there's this cloud just drifting by ominously on the sea behind. It's like Spielberg has made some decisions to take advantage of some of the landscape and say, well, you can make, if you shoot this in a particular way, that's going to look more scary and more ominous. And there's a general sense of completely unthreatening menace, if that makes sense. It's very safe. You never actually feel a sense of peril.
Absolutely.
But it's menacing.
And I would say that his direction is actually really good, because I was really invested in this episode. For some reason, I couldn't figure out why. I knew who the killer was. I found him over the top. But it must be the way that he just kind of, put everything together, and the way he shot things, the way he edited things. I found it interesting.
There is a general sort of almost aesthetic about that sort of 1970s LA set TV show as well. It's just quite it's complete. There's a lot of danger, but it feels like very safe danger because there's a sort of a formula that you're comfortable with. 1970s LA probably wasn't the safest place to be, but you never feel Columbo's at any risk of harm. You never really feel any of the characters on the periphery are at any risk of harm. It's just this stuff that centers around the key characters. And there's something quite, there's something quite compelling about that. I don't know why. It's so specific to LA 1970s. I don't know. There's a dynamic there that I don't know. I just find really watchable.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd agree. I like any sort of exterior scenes, and I like the drive to San Diego. I don't know where they were when he drives down. So this is sort of our next advancement through the plot here, where Ken Franklin and then Jim, he somehow, and I mean the plausibility of him convincing Jim, hey, why don't we just sight unseen get in the car, drive to San Diego, and hang out in my apartment together, or in my cabin together, despite the fact that your wife is expecting you home for dinner literally this evening. And we just broke up and signed this deal to not work together anymore. It seems that to me was the least plausible part, that Jim would be on board with this, like partying with Ken all weekend.
Such a risky strategy.
And sit on that couch covered in plastic.
Yes. Yeah. No, but it's like, you're right. That's the riskiest part of the whole plan, because the entire plan fails if Jim just says, oh, no, honestly, mate, just go away, will you? Like, this is weird. Like, was it Ken says to him, you're going to be my first male guest, which is a bit of a sleazy thing to say.
Because now you haven't seen it, you're going to be my first male guest.
But there is like, why is Jim going to go with him? It's not even a very attractive proposition, is it? It's like, we'll drive all the way down to San Diego, we'll open another bottle and we'll go fishing, and then you'll be back by midnight. It's like, well, hold on, what kind of an afternoon is this? We're going to get drunk in San Diego and go fishing, and then you're going to drive you back, presumably drunk. And like, actually, no, mate, I'd rather just see my wife tonight, if that's okay. And if Jim says that, then this plan is over. And I don't understand why Jim does go with him, but he does.
And also, let's stop at this store with this woman who's obsessed with me.
Anybody home?
Drive before. You can make it in one shot without stopping at the one store where there's a woman who works there who's obsessed with you, who's clear from the get-go. I'm like, oh, this lady's super thirsty for Jack Cassidy. Like, wow. And I didn't know that she was going to be involved in the plot, but I had an idea because she's like
And there's
snooping around.
two reasons he does need to do that, because he needs to make the phone call to let Joanna know where he's going to be, so Joanna can give him the alibi. But he also potentially gets another witness out of Lily Lasanka, doesn't he, by saying, "Oh yeah, no, yeah, Ken was here. He stopped by to pick up his groceries as he always does." So he's following the routine, isn't he, that he would normally do when he goes to the cabin. So that's why he's done it.
The cons outweigh the pros in this case, though.
Oh, it's so risky. He's got the murder victim sitting in his car. If Lily looks out of the shop, as it turns out she did, again, this is a massive problem. So yeah, very risky.
This could never happen today. This particular plot, this plan that he has, that he tries to execute, is so unbelievably implausible by today's standards. It seems like, I mean, the only reason he gets caught is because he admits it, basically. There's like a bunch of circumstantial evidence, but never enough to convict a guy in a court of law. Like, come on. OJ didn't get convicted, right? You know, Jim's going to be updating his social media, like from the drive. There's no way he's going to be able to slip away from his wife, you know, for this period of time. So there's not much point in digging too deeply into that. I'm just like, I'm not going to say I lament the days when you could have easily gotten away with the murder. And when those days aren't very long ago, like 50 years ago. I mean, he really does bury himself on this one. But because there's just no cell phone data, there's no GPS tracking whatsoever, I think it probably would have been pretty easy to murder. Well, not your murder mystery writing partner for whom you had an insurance policy out on, who you just left with for the weekend. It still seems a bit thin, but.
Yeah, I'm sad that my window for murder has closed.
Yeah.
It's just harder now.
Serial killing especially. How does a serial killer get away with anything now?
I don't get him.
I watched this TV show Hannibal. I'm like, whoa, come on. There's 18 murders that happen within a 10-block radius. And everyone's gruesomely murdered in the same way. How is this? Anyway, okay. So I'm going to suspend that disbelief for the rest of this because there's no point in digging too deeply into on that. So at this point in where we're like 18 minutes in, I'm like, okay, so now I get the premise of this show. It's just, we're going to watch Columbo figure this out. What I want to know from Paul Murphy, and maybe Paul Sykes has some insight on this as well. Who is Columbo? Because Columbo knows from the get-go, from the first second, that Jack Cassidy is the murderer. He walks up to him within 30 seconds. It's like a job interview. You know you're going to hire somebody or not. Columbo's like, oh, this is the guy who did it. Is the rest of the 60 minutes of the show, when every interaction that Columbo has is relatively the only interactions we see are Columbo with Jack Cassidy. We never really see Columbo dealing with anybody else. He talks to the wife a little bit, but it's like,
he makes her an omelet.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, well, that's also bizarre. Like, he just like, I'm like, is Columbo moving in here? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Why does he need a different bowl for the eggshells? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, never mind.
I thought that whole shtick. I thought his whole thing with the omelets and the thing is, I thought it was just to disarm anyone, make them more at ease, just by like the look. I'm just I don't know, some eggs over here, and I thought that was kind of like. I thought that's how he derives information.
And there's a real like contrast between the formal police guys who are there trying to figure out what's going on. They're not really speaking to Joanna because they don't think she's got anything that can help them. And he picks up on the fact, if I can just get her to talk to me, open up, tell me a few interesting things about the husband, then maybe I can learn a little bit more. And he does manage to get her at ease, and then obviously learns a lot of things that he needs to learn to get him on the right track. And I think that's the sort of thing. Who is he? He's a guy who does a lot of work on his own. He's quite good. He's quite a people person. He understands how to sort of get information out of people. He can befriend people. He can also, by being a sort of somebody who appears not to get many social cues, he can outstay his welcome where other people might feel that they're being shut down.
See, but this is appearance. I keep hearing here that Columbo is putting on this ruse almost from the get-go to gain information to solve the murder. Is Columbo ever like out of character? Like when I say who is Columbo, like I get from the second, he's like everything that he does, from the bumbling routine, from the making the omelet, inviting himself over, pretending to be hapless and kind of clueless. Is that all an act to solve the murder? And if so, do we ever get a sense of like Columbo, who he is outside of solving murders? Because to me, he's just fucking with people the entire episode now. He knows it's Jack Cassidy. He's like, all right, I'm gonna put on my goofy little thing and like, oh, just one more thing. The first time he did this, just one more thing, Jack Cassidy, I'm like, oh, this is gonna happen about 7 times, and it's gonna happen about 7 times in every single episode of Columbo, where Columbo's leaving, and now the murder is like unassuming, and he's sort of lured into this false sense of security, and then Columbo's like, oh, and by the way, here's one thing that's really gonna throw you off.
You found some human torsos in your bathtub, and that's just weird.
Yeah.
I don't have any human torsos in my bathtub.
So, like, is Columbo a real person? Do we ever find out anything more about Columbo?
Like, you don't really find anything out about him. The whole point is you don't even find out what his first name is. He only ever gets called Columbo or Lieutenant. So yeah, you have, and that's part of the thing, isn't it? It's almost like what I read into it is he's an effective cop who with a particular style that clearly doesn't work for everybody, but is effective at solving crimes. Not quite sure how effective it will be in getting convictions, and we might be able to come on to talk about this a little bit, because I'm sure if we did a bit of like a Law and Order kind of thing with Columbo, I think you'd have a lot of, you can just imagine the district attorney being, oh, this fucking Joker again. We've got a couple. He's got something about whether or not somebody took a flight and a signed book in somebody's shelf. Oh, come off it. We're not going to get a conviction out of this. So I think there's definitely a problem with that. But he comes across as, sort of a lovable uncle kind of character who clearly has a pretty happy home life. But you don't actually know whether Mrs. Columbo exists or not. That could just be a story that he gives people. You'd never really find out whether Mrs. Columbo is alive or dead.
We never ever meet Mrs. Columbo.
No.
She's like Vera from Cheers.
There was a spin-off series called Mrs. Columbo.
Oh.
Don't bother watching it.
Starring who as Mrs. Columbo?
I can't remember.
Does Peter Falk make an appearance in it?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Yeah. They made 2 pilot episodes and then did not make a show.
Is she a detective, or does she like work at a diner?
I think she just works. She does. Actually, funnily enough, in the first series, she works in catering. Or the first episode, and yeah, she's not a detective, but she ends up solving mysteries. Don't watch it. Don't watch it.
Oh no! See, I mean, I need a premise to do anything interesting that other people on the internet haven't done already. So maybe watching the Mrs. Columbo pilot is one of those things.
I'm all in for Mrs. Columbo.
I'm all in for losing 50% of our subscribers and viewers. Just by the click of a... Okay.
But it just that disarming thing, the one more thing, and it's not always one more thing. It's lots of different things that he'll do. But the classic, I'm leaving you.
Yeah.
And you think you're okay, and then I just throw in something which is a bit of a hand grenade and completely undermines everything you thought was okay a second ago. Exactly. And there is a lovely chemistry that you normally see develop in the best Columbo episodes, I think, between Columbo and the killer, which is the killer getting gradually more and more flustered. And then, and that comes out as anger towards Columbo. And you could always tell, I remember as a kid being like, oh, you can always tell when Columbo's about to get him, because it's when the killer suddenly responds to Columbo turning up and is like, honestly, Columbo, I can't understand why you're here again. This is really unacceptable. This is harassment.
Columbo. All right, now what are you doing here?
And it's like, oh, okay, he's nearly got you then, because there's the previous 3 or 4 occasions you pretended to kind of humor him. Oh, my dear fellow. Oh, Mrs. Melville would have had this. Oh, maybe read some more Mrs. Melville books. Oh, of course I'll talk to you again. But then there gets to a certain point where it's like, okay, I'm getting really pissed off now. Why are you here again? And it's because he's pushing their buttons. And the more upset and frustrated they get, the more likely they are to often make up really pointless lies as well and say things that are just stupid. I love it when the killers try to account for something that they've done, such as in this case with Ken Franklin opening his bills. Like, why were you opening your mail when there was a body lying on your lawn? And he's like, oh, well, I felt very distressed and I just felt the need to distract myself. And Columbo says, yeah, I suppose bills are distracting.
Now me, if I found my partner dead, I'd never think of opening my letters.
But I just did it to distract myself.
Yeah. Oh, that's understandable. And bills are distracting.
And it's like, there's that moment where it's like, we all know that's just a hopeless reason you've given me. Like, why give me a reason? Just say, I've no idea. I don't even remember opening them. I must have been on automatic pilot. No idea at all. I was in such a mess.
I gotta say, this is a dangerous methodology, though, because if anyone's a flight risk, they are going to Venezuela on the next flight.
Columbo really does tip his hand a lot. So I'm trying to solve this murder, but it's very clear that I suspect you because I keep asking you about like peculiar holes in your particular story. For sure. Like that's the point where Jack Cassidy's like, I'm collecting the insurance money and I'm getting the hell out of here, right?
Yeah.
And also with these guys, I think and there's no way that Jack Cassidy's not a prime suspect in this already due to his proximity to the partner. Aren't you immediately just saying, look, I appreciate what you're doing here, detective, but I'm not going to incriminate whatever's going on. You need to talk to my lawyer. There's no way that he's hanging out, inviting Columbo in for drinks. Columbo can't go over to a prime suspect's house and just hang out with him for a bit and continually ask him questions. Columbo just invites himself in all the time. Well,
yeah.
Okay.
He's also not making contemporaneous notes either, is he? So technically, chain of evidence.
Also, don't dump the body on your front lawn if you don't want Columbo coming into your living room. Okay? How about a shallow grave in the forest?
That is a particularly ballsy move, isn't it? I know what'll make me look completely. I was in San Diego and I drove back, and now the body's on my front lawn. I mean, this is it's definitely the organized crime syndicate I told you about, Columbo.
Yeah, the fact that he immediately is like, well, you know who it is, right? It's the mafia. Look, right. I've got a list of mafia figures. Columbo.
That was my biggest problem with the episode.
I was really surprised when the body turned up on his lawn. You've got an entire stretch of ocean between here and Los Angeles. Okay, so I love seeing the decor. One of the things I liked about this, that I also like about James Bond movies, is getting this sort of this time capsule piece. Like, I was alive through part of the 70s, but not very much of it. So I don't really, I certainly see a lot of homes that were decorated in the 70s and people haven't updated. But to see these interiors of these homes that were supposedly lavish at the time, the decor is suicide inducing in a lot of these places. Like if I had to live in any one of these people's homes, right, I wouldn't last 6 months, especially during like quarantine, COVID-y type things, or winter. It's like horrible.
It gave me a Diamonds Are Forever vibe for sure. A lot of the interiors.
I remember assuming when I was a kid that once you were a grown up, that all you did if you were successful all day was drink whiskey from decanters, because that's what they genuinely. I thought that was. I was like, oh god, how am I going to get down with that? Because as a kid, I was like, I don't like the taste of whiskey. Why is it that people just want to drink it all day? Or is it posh people just drink whiskey out of decanters? But yeah, there's a very 1970s vibe that you just can't recreate it. It's so time capsule.
No.
There is a lot of hey Columbo, do you want to have a drink while you're here? And Columbo's like, sure, I'll have a drink. And Columbo is in the middle of a murder investigation and he's on the job, but he's definitely going to have that drink in the prime suspect's home. I like how loosey-goosey all of these things were back in that time, where you hadn't established all these specific police investigative work and standards for how you conducted your investigation. You could kind of do whatever you want. And how much of the show, which is a lean 75 minutes, was rotary phone dialing? Because I think it was at least 3 minutes of it where we have to wait for our murder victim.
And actually, And when Jim places the call, of course, you have to watch him place the call twice, because the first time he calls the operator, and Jack Cassidy has to say no.
Oh, operator, I'd like to make a...
Hold it. It's a cinch you have never cheated on Joanna before.
And again, you learn a bit about his character again, don't you? Because he says, I can tell you've never cheated on your wife. And it's like, like he just can't pass off an excuse to brag about how many women he's had sex with, can he?
I'm just thankful in those scenes, those numbers didn't have a lot of 9s or 0s in them, and they try to set them to like 3s or 4s and the fake phone numbers.
I was going to say that call he makes from Lily Lasanka's shop is such a risky call, because he calls Joanna up to purportedly to explain for why a call has been made from his cabin to Joanna's house, right? That's why he's done it. So he's already on a bit of a timescale, because I've got to get this guy to the cabin pretty quickly so he can call Joanna. So Joanna will remember the calls being around a similar time. He's also got Lily Lasanka spying on him in his car and probably listening on the phone call that he's making. And he calls Joanna and basically just says, "Oh, well, I'm off down to the cabin. Oh, by the way, you do have the number for my cabin, don't you? Just in case anything should happen."
I know.
Yeah.
And you can even see they don't even try to sort of like to style that out. They show Joanna being like, "Well, yeah, but what? Yeah, no, of course I do. That's a bit like it's a bit of a strange question." What a risky strategy.
When Columbo lauds him for the first murder, I was always thinking, this is the biggest weakness. It would just be more effective to put on a ski mask and shoot him while he's out in the street and then like run away. It would be a better crime than this one.
Yeah. He could easily jump him right outside of the office. He knows he's in the office. It's late at night. He's leaving. Just bang. Ski mask done.
Yeah.
I love. Okay, so where does Lily Lasanka encounter him? Are they at the opera? Is Jack Cassidy at the opera with someone who's clearly 30 years younger than him? Like
He's
very
watching
attractive
a play.
babe. A play. All right.
He says, and he sort of says, he makes a comment about, oh, well, you can always tell when they bring in somebody who claims to be somebody's long lost twin that they're an imposter. But I found it very, very derisory. You know, it's basically like I've seen lots of plays like this, and they're not very good. But so yeah, he's at the theatre and he's about to go for a late supper. He says with this woman who's half his age.
Yes, correct.
See, half his age. I can't put an age to Jack Cassidy. He could be 45 or 70, and I'd be like, okay.
He was 44. I looked this up. He was 44 when this was made, and he would be dead like a mere 5 years later.
Wow.
But as would Barbara Colby, Lily Lasanka also. Both of these people died horrific, tragic deaths. Like really unexpected deaths.
She was murdered in a parking lot, wasn't she, with somebody? Yeah.
She was murdered in, like you say, in some kind of a parking lot. I want to say in New York City or something like that. And then this guy, Jack Cassidy, are you familiar with the details of Jack Cassidy's death?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Murph, do you want to relive the horror?
Well, he had a drink problem, didn't he? He was a very heavy drinker, and he had mental health issues. He had struggled with bipolar. He struggled with his sexuality. He had a lot of problems, I think. And he went out and had a bit of a heavy session and fell asleep back at his apartment and set fire to his couch, I believe, and with a cigarette, and was killed in the blaze. At the age of 49 or something.
He was really, maybe 49.
You know who could solve this case? Columbo.
Big time.
I suspect it was foul play.
What a sad, tragic end.
That's awful.
Stuff like that really doesn't happen, I don't think, as much. I guess celebrities, Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. And
the 70s was a wild time.
Yeah. There are not a lot of safety standards for various things. And everybody smoked heavily and felt it was okay to get wasted and drift off.
and build all of your furniture out of highly toxic, highly flammable materials.
How dare you say that about Naugahyde? So look, I love the scene where Lily confronts him. At first I'm like, what is she doing here? Is it just a coincidence? Like, I genuinely thought they just ran into one another, and this was like so beyond belief. But it turns out she is this like creepy opportunist who is obsessed with Jack Cassidy, but also wants to blackmail him for...
Very well, Lily. How much for your silence?
$15,000.
$15,000. Great. this scene is the creepiest scene in the whole. They set her up and they light her in such a way that she looks like a monstrous, like Bigfoot or something like that. She's so frightening and menacing the way she's like, no, I think you really want to come with me. Like we need to have a meeting right now. And he's like, oh shit, dude. Like I'm hurt here.
It's fantastic, and I actually wish they used her as a villain in another thing, because I think the way they shot her and the way she came across was so sinister and so creepy. They used a low angle a lot on that with like really weird shading, and it just came across so good.
But at the same time, she's incredibly vulnerable as well. That's the other thing. Was the second they actually start talking about the numbers, she's actually quite embarrassed to be blackmailing him. She's very much like, I'm not very good at this. Like, I don't want to be doing this, but I kind of need the money. I'm raising a child alone.
I know it's a lot, but that's all I'll ever ask for, honestly. And I'm a woman of my word.
I know you are, and I respect you for that. You know what? In that spirit, I accept your terms.
There's the question marks over. So what's happened to this previous husband then, and maybe other husbands? Like there are definitely some men who've come into her life and have then died, which is always kind of just like she seems to be very comfortable though in Ken Franklin's presence, despite the safe knowledge that he last week drove his car down to his cabin and murdered somebody there. She still feels relatively comfortable. I mean, she doesn't necessarily want to go out for a swim in the middle of the lake with him, but she as she says, because she's a bit nervous about that. But she clearly, I think on balance, she comes across as actually quite vulnerable, quite an interesting character, because she's kind of like the reluctant criminal. Like she kind of doesn't want to blackmail him, but she sees an opportunity for herself. She also, I think, genuinely is a bit obsessed and besotted with this guy, and it's like, well, I don't want to get him into trouble. I'm sure there's a logical reasons for why he murdered his writing partner.
The only problem I have with this entire scene though is that she should have been on high alert after she asked him to go out in the boat in the middle of the lake, right? That is fun. Always keep facing him. Get a knife, get a palm a knife somewhere. Just have some mode of self-defense.
I mean, going out on a boat like that, she's obviously going to feel like she has to like put out because of the implication.
Well, dude, think about it. She's out in the middle of nowhere with some dude she barely knows. She looks around her. What does she see? Nothing but open ocean. There's nowhere for me to run. What am I going to do? Say no?
Okay, that seems really dark.
No, it's not dark. You're misunderstanding me, bro.
I think I am.
Yeah, you are. Because if the girl said no, then the answer obviously is no.
No.
But the thing is she's not gonna say no. She would never say no because of the implication.
I mean, okay, so this is there's a lot of people I noticed that want to interview Jack Cassidy are like one half of famous murder mystery duo novelist writing teams like that sought after in the press. Like he's very famous, it seems like, whereas I couldn't name the partner in a successful murder mystery writing duo currently, and if I did, I certainly wouldn't be able to identify them, and I probably wouldn't necessarily need to interview them. I thought that was a bit of a reach.
I think that there was a little bit explained, because I think that they mentioned that he did a lot of that Ken did a lot of the PR stuff, and he negotiated with like movie rights and stuff like that. So I'm assuming this was just a big franchise that got all sorts of movie exposure, TV exposure.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
there's also a kind of a thing I think Columbo does, which is always trying to suggest that detective fiction is a really big deal. There's a lot of occasions during it where they're like, oh well, obviously you know how much money there is to be made out of detective dramas, and with Peter Falk's paycheck, he could probably attest to that, because it was huge what Peter Falk was on by midway through the Columbo series. It really was.
Really?
Can't quite. Yeah, insane money involved.
Yeah, and
I
think mysteries in general were probably big in the 70s and early 80s. You remember like all like the Babysitters Club books and the Encyclopedia Brown books and Agatha Christie. Like there's a ton of stuff and a lot of shows too, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of different 70s era detective style shows that sort of like the one name guy like Banachek or Kojak. Do those guys exist? Is there ever a Kojak crossover? in the Columbo world? Like, do they acknowledge that one another exists? All these like similar mystery type. We've got a procedural, episodic. It's not like there's no story arc in Columbo where we're solving. Like I watch these current shows where you've got 10 episodes, 8 episodes or whatever, but there's a huge arc throughout the entire thing. This is just a one-off. We're going to solve the mystery.
There's a crossover between Columbo and Murder, She Wrote, where Jessica Fletcher and Columbo do the they meet, which doesn't happen. That's not true. But you kind of believe that it could. But you kind of believe that it could happen, right? Like,
yeah, I would have loved to see that. They had to catch like the Moriarty of their time, and only all like Peter Falk and Kojak and Angela Lansbury can do it.
Yeah.
Wait, so this did happen or it didn't happen?
No, it didn't.
Why did you make that up? I was so excited.
Because I just thought, I was like, if you reacted like, what? No, I can't believe that. I was doing it just to try and judge, because I genuinely think it sounds like a perfectly plausible thing. If somebody told me there was a crossover, I'd be like, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. I can't believe I haven't seen that episode, but yeah.
I reacted like it was a natural thing, like it was a natural progression, and that's where Columbo would go, is like, look, we need to boost the ratings. Can you imagine? Here are the ratings for Columbo. Here are the ratings for Murder, She Wrote. But you put those two together, boom, synergistic. Right? Not just like the sum of their parts, but like more than that. Exponential growth.
Absolutely.
In terms of ratings,
I would love to see a reboot and see like a broader Columbo shared universe.
We should talk Columbo reboot, but let's couch that let's finish our discussion of the show proper. And then I think this is fascinating. Okay. So let's see. I love the murder scene. Jack Cassidy is so excited to be murdering her. Like, he's so pleased with himself. He's just like grinning ear to ear as he's shining that bottle up, and he's just ready to smack her on the head. Peter Falk has definitely already made a comment on, hey, I noticed you had 2 champagne bottles.
I noticed the 2 bottles of champagne.
Oh, those.
Like, as a point, you're going away by yourself, but you've got 2 champagne bottles. Pick anything else to murder this lady with. Anything but the champagne bottles. And then also, don't murder her, dump her in a lake, and also bury the champagne bottles right next to it. I don't know how deep that lake is, but you're getting a dive team in there. And if they turn up one of those bottles, it's going to be pretty evident. Now, it turns out the champagne does, even though of all the things they could have found out about the murder, the champagne cork is the most circumstantial, like least useful piece of evidence. I mean, anyone drinks champagne, but Columbo is immediately like, oh, there's a cork here. So obviously it was from one of those bottles that you clearly used to murder this. There's no like identification of how she died. She clearly got her skull smashed in. That shows up. I don't care if you've been in the lake for a day, which is about as long as she's been in there for. Her skull is going to be completely destroyed. Nobody mentions that at any point.
They did. They explained that in the boat. She got it when the boat flipped over and hit her head. That's then they explained it. And yes, there is an autopsy. They're waiting for the toxology report, but it hasn't. It never comes back, I don't think.
Oh,
they very much. They're not too bothered about her murder, are they? At the end of the day, Columbo wants to get him for killing Jim Ferris. He's not. He's almost not fussed about the second murder.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's outside of his jurisdiction. He's not even really supposed to be down there investigating it. I mean, yeah, it is a strange one. As he says, it's a sloppy murder.
It's a sloppy murder. What I want to ask too, though, is this guy is so happy to be murdering people. Are these his first 2 murders, or has he been murdering people? Because you don't go 44 years and be that excited about murdering people, right? Like, if you've had these inclinations, you start a little younger. I don't know.
It's hard for me to assume that this was the first time because of the pleasure that he takes in the act. I mean, maybe the first one was the first one. Even though he is very excited about it, but he's so thrilled to be taking care of Lily Lysenko in this fashion. But Columbo's not impressed with this murder at all. Columbo's somewhat impressed with the first murder. He's not impressed with this one at all. He thinks it's quite sloppy.
Well, it's sloppy and it's so reactive, isn't it? It's not even quite clear whether he had decided how he was going to kill her. I think he's improvising when he kills her with the bottle, because he'd initially thought, if I can get her out on the boat, that's where I'll kill her. Right. So everything about it is just like he's making it up as he goes along, and it means that he's going to slip up and make really stupid mistakes, like leaving the champagne cork and
which isn't enough to convict anyone of anything other than having a champagne cork.
But
it's
so true.
Stupid.
But he didn't even have to take the $15,000 out of the bank. He could have just filled it with bologna sandwiches because they don't open it right until her house. So that was.
And why on earth did he do it? Why did he take the 15 grand out and put it back? It just makes no sense. He could have, like you say, given her a suitcase full of sandwiches or anything at all. And she opens it and at that moment realizes, oh God, but he's already got the champagne bottle by that point. But no, he didn't do it that way. Very, very, very odd choice. I was wondering, are we supposed to think maybe he's kind of making it, he hasn't necessarily decided he's definitely going to murder her? I don't know. Is he thinking maybe I can kind of, maybe I can work with the blackmail? Is he trying to work out whether or not what do you think? You reckon he's absolutely committed at the moment he goes down there that he's gonna murder her?
Yeah, he's got the bloodlust now.
Big time. He's had a taste for it. Nobody stops at one. Not especially when you're getting away with it as so well. Like he's already so under the thumb of Columbo right now. Like Columbo's watching his every move to the extent that you could at that time. You can't just casually murder this. So stupid. But there's no way Jack Cassidy's given up 15 grand. That's a huge amount of money at that time. And clearly he's motivated entirely by money, right? Because he's scared that he's going to lose his lifestyle.
He also says that he knows he's going to get a fuck ton of money from the insurance policy. And he does say, I've lost more than 15 grand in one night gambling before.
I was prepared to give you considerably more than you asked for. 15,000. I mean, I've lost that much gambling in one night.
Well, it certainly is a great deal of money to me.
And he can't work out why she's asked for such little money. So I just wonder, is part of him, because they obviously have this meal, don't they? And is he trying to suss her out over this meal and work out what's going to happen next? Or has he absolutely decided, no, I'm definitely going to kill you?
I think the dialogue would have had to point us in that direction more, and I don't think it did. I think that if there was a little bit of back and forth, and like where he became, it became clear that at some point she was going to ask for more money, or at some point, she was going to use it to leverage it to become her boyfriend or something like that. But we never see that play, so I just have to assume he planned to murder her the whole time.
There's no point where Jack Cassidy's face or mannerisms reflects conflict. He's not conflicted about what he's going to do. He is reveling in the idea that he's going to get to murder this lady and keep his 15 grand.
He's not a man who seems particularly troubled by any great amount of self-doubt or ethical concerns, or he's pretty confident in where he is in life, isn't he?
It's true. So guys, basically, I mean, the show unravels really quickly at this point. Columbo presents this jumble of circumstantial evidence, and then also provides him with, here's the entire somehow Columbo roots around the desk long enough to find handwritten the entire plot for this murder, the alibi, I should say, as well, and uses that and confronts him with that directly and says, this is clearly, this is ironclad evidence that you did this. And Jack Cassidy's like, yeah, I guess it is. You got me. And he's so ego driven that he's like, he has to say that that's the one thing that I wrote. And so that's what brings it. It's so unbelievable. I'm really sorry. Every TV show ends with a murderer confessing. And I know why that has to happen for TV, but that has never, ever, ever happened. No one on the stands in a criminal trial has ever been like, shit, you got me. That never has ever happened. And certainly while a police officer is kind of confronting you without any legal representation present, like that wouldn't hold up anyway, that admission.
Right.
Sure, I'm telling this cop that I did it, but like I hire a lawyer and 2 days later they're like, yeah, that's inadmissible evidence. You didn't read this guy's rights, blah, 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 blah. Like you can't use that in court. So this is presumably why Jack Cassidy comes back for multiple episodes, because he never went to jail. He's not convicted of the original crime.
And I think this is the only episode where Columbo even tries to read somebody their rights. He does actually start reading them, and the guy says, "Oh, I've heard that before. I'm a detective writer. You don't need to say that to me." So it's like, wow, but legally you do.
You still do. And Columbo's like, he's got me there. I guess I don't have to Mirandize this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? Though they use the confession trope so often. Like Law and Order is really guilty of this, where they break down on the stand. So I'm kind of numb to it, and I guess you do expect it in a way. And I think that is a necessary interaction for this type of thing. The arrogant, this just completely arrogant guy breaking down and confessing, but still having to say that, oh yeah, this was my smart idea, and oh, I almost got away with it.
You gotta admit I had you going for a while now, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
No, you didn't. At no point. He suspected you in the first 10 seconds.
Okay, so
And there is a wonderful moment where Columbo is talking. It's the most honest, I think, accidentally the writers have ever been, which is it sums up his entire approach to detective work. And I had to write it down because I was like, God, I can't believe he said it in this, where Joanna says to him, you've got a signed book and a champagne cork. What does that prove? And Columbo actually says, by itself, it doesn't prove anything. But if you assume Franklin committed these crimes, it all makes sense. And it's like, so that really is that's where he's coming from. He's decided from the very beginning this guy's done it, and every other bit of evidence that I see is now based around my assumption this guy's done it. And to be honest, it's really only that I think there's three key things: the 15 grand being withdrawn and being put back in, the signed book in the bookshelf, and the obviously the fact that the plot for the murder already exists. Those are the sort of things that I think he probably has been caught out on that probably are sort of substantive evidence once you put them all together, but it's still a very flimsy case. And I think the DA probably would take one look at it and be like, no, we're going to need a lot more than this. But at least you got the confession. I guess that was, at least that's on tape, right? Well, no, it's not on tape as such, but he did confess to me, and okay, all right, well, okay, as long as you're willing to swear to that. And that was after you'd read him his rights. Oh, well, I didn't actually read him his rights because he said I didn't have to because he's a detective writer. Oh, for fuck's sake. Like, you've got nothing. You really don't have very much.
This guy's going to be out in 2 days murdering more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole thing about the drive from LA to San Diego, he says, oh, well, it's very strange. You know, if I needed to get back to LA quickly, I would have thought you would have taken a plane. It's like, I might say it's 2 hours, right?
It's not very far.
Yeah.
So if you drove to the airport, if you're in San Diego and you went, well, I have to drive to the airport, I have to drive into San Diego City to go to the airport. And I know it's the 1970s and planes fly like every 15 minutes and you can smoke and bring bombs on them and do everything like that. But like, you'd have to queue for a flight, right? Buy a flight, get on a flight, go land off out in LAX and then drive back. That's going to take longer than 2 hours. Like, I don't understand why we're even entertaining the possibility that makes him look suspicious. It's really strange.
He had much better evidence, like the body on his lawn, and like he was so right.
Yeah,
and how easy he was able to find that list of like mafia suspects.
Yeah, and surely like the absence of any blood spatter, right, in the office. This guy was shot to death in his office, and there's not a speck of his blood anywhere. But anyway. Now I'm choosing to quibble. I don't know why. I was very happy.
Sure. So you have to suspend a ton of disbelief. And so we're at the end of the episode. Obviously, this guy confesses and Columbo solves the murder. And I don't know if he's particularly excited about it. He does spend a lot of time talking to the widow about, here's what's going to happen. Here's how I know it. Here's what, like, why is he going and detailing his strategy and how he's going to ultimately apprehend Jack Cassidy to the widow of Jim or whatever. It's weird to, as a police detective, to just I think detail your investigative strategy with a murder victim's wife
and a potential suspect, just by the law of averages.
Yeah, there's very few other people here who could have done it, so you would probably not want to detail that level of your investigation. But I found that a little.
You're absolutely right. If I was Jack Cassidy's defense attorney, the first thing I'd be doing was saying, isn't it interesting that the only person who seems to have pulled together all these little bits of evidence is Joanna, the wife who benefits hugely from his death? And I find that really interesting. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's an obvious one.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is why we never get to see the convictions, because they never happen.
Yeah. Is it just easier to pick apart these things now because it's 50 years later? Or because I don't watch current murder mystery procedural type shows. There must be something equivalent to this on the air right now, like Bones or something like that. I have no idea.
Right.
Where David Boreanaz does something, and he probably has supernatural powers or whatever it is. But like, is it that easy to pick apart these plots currently in present day media, or because have they built on this, or is this still the general premise where everybody confesses and it's really easy to figure things out?
I think dramatically, you are still just relying on confessions a lot, aren't you? Sorry, Paul.
No, I was just gonna say that I thought I think these shows are more about the destination. Like, I don't think Columbo is about, like, it's obviously not about the mystery of the murder, right? It's just whether you enjoy this kind of, like, you know, he wears the frumpled coat and he's all like, you know, very unassuming. And if you enjoy that character and his methodology, my only question to Paul is this, like, and Ryan, you mentioned this, is this every episode? Because I would revisit a couple of like episodes, but I think I would get kind of fatigued of this over the long run.
So there is some development. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a lot of development, but there are some interesting games they play, and there's interesting kind of takes on the to what extent does Columbo bring the murderer on to help him solve the mystery or give him that impression. But yeah, it's pretty formulaic. And I think lethargic would be a fair way of describing how the impact it has on a lot of people. You're not watching these because you're going to see something particularly. Oh, I really like what they've done with the Columbo character, how they've developed him, and how the series has moved on from those earlier awkward episodes. No, very much this is a formula that they pretty much got comfortable with. They add some different takes on it. Inevitably, the episodes where they try and do something different are the most ineffective, unenjoyable episodes. So yeah, no, this is I strap in for it, because this is as good as it gets, really. I think genuinely, like this is probably comfortably one of the top 10 episodes, possibly a lot of people's top 5 episodes.
Right. I mean,
if you're inclined to rate Columbo episodes.
And it's a signature of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think in a lot of these episodic shows, there was never a character arc. You know, like Hunter didn't become like, oh, you know, I got over this and the death of whatever, nothing happened, right? It was just Hunter every single episode. I think it's just Columbo every single episode.
You know, I'm going to take umbrage with what you're saying about Hunter right now. And I think you're really missing out on a lot of the nuances of Fred Dreyer's take on that character. There was also a lot of interesting stuff, tension between him and his partner, Dee Dee McCall. So that's something that we can dig into on our, I'm a Man, I'm 50 retrospective of Hunter. I would love, honestly, I would kill to watch a Hunter episode.
Oh, we could do a Hunter.
We definitely need to do an episode of Hunter. Which Paul Murphy probably doesn't know what we're talking about at all. But
I'm nodding and smiling. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I'm really intrigued.
See, so look, I think that we flipped the script on Paul Murphy and make him watch like one of the best 3-arc episodes. There's 3 episode arcs of Hunter where he's solving a particularly heinous series of serial murders. Doing it in Hunter style fashion where he definitely blows people away with his 45 Magnum. It's just like there's no Hunter style justice that involves a courtroom.
Works for me.
Well, I think this is a kind of, weirdly enough, maybe this is something that was quite likable about Columbo as well, was the fact that although every episode hinges around something heinous, i.e. nearly always a premeditated murder by an organized person, there's no threat at all or risk from Columbo. There's no sense that he's ever going to pull a gun out. There's no sense that he's ever going to get into a scuffle with the murderer. The murderers are nearly always very rich. I think they're almost uniformly white men and women. They are always millionaires. They're people who often seem quite they've almost, the reason they've gone through an organized murder route is because they actually could. You said like interesting, like, oh, why couldn't he just shoot, put on a ski mask, shoot his writing colleague and dump him in the sea? Yeah, probably would actually be more effective. But this guy almost thinks he's above that. There's almost this sense of, oh no, I'm a very sort of refined person. I can't get my hands too dirty. And there's that, as a result, there's never any palpable sense of violence or risk. It's really odd.
It is odd
for a show based on murder.
Oh, absolutely. And this is what I have this theory. I have this theory that Columbo is actually just a poor autistic hobo who sits on a bench and solves murders in his head. Because I got the same feeling that he kind of exists in this vacuum where he's like, he's just smarter than everyone, and everyone's confessing things to him, and there's no imminent danger to him whatsoever. He goes into like prime suspects a one-on-one without any backup. So Columbo is a figment of his own imagination.
That's a really interesting take. And I wonder if at the end of all of the Columbos, it pans back, he just closes the book and Fred Savage is still sitting there on the bed.
Maybe you could come over and read it again to me tomorrow.
As you wish.
And what we've actually been watching is just how Fred Savage has imagined his grandfather's life to be. Oh, tell me the one about the cop again, Granddad.
I like that theory better.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Wow, you can't top that. Oh man, it's okay. So let's kind of work towards wrapping this up here. Paul Sykes, did you enjoy your viewing of Columbo? Would you view any more Columbos? Or, now that you know that this is the Columbo shtick, you kind of got your pop culture reference for Columbo going forward. You don't need to dig any deeper.
You know what? I actually really did enjoy this. I'm not just saying that for the sake of the podcast. I was surprisingly how quick that hour and 15 minutes moved, and my animosity to Paul Murphy faded very sharply throughout the episode. Would I revisit it? Yeah, maybe if someone said, hey, these are 2 other Columbo episodes, I think they're really good, you got to check out. There's just something like, I don't know, it's weird, like comforting about the show. Like you just watch it, doesn't really challenge you too much, but you can pay attention to kind of other things, and as a little bit of a period piece. Yeah, I'd probably watch a couple episodes. I don't think I'd go in a season by season like marathon Netflix session of Columbo, but I can see.
If I'm not just going to go and casually be like, I'm going to watch season 3, episode 7 of The Sopranos. You could do that with Columbo. And you don't have you don't need any leading into it, and you don't need to do any follow-up on it. If I'm going to sit down and watch The Sopranos, it's a freaking 6 or 7 season commitment of days, of weeks, or whatever of my life. But this is like one and done, baby.
Yeah.
Columbo, it's very comfortably. Yeah. You could easily just have somebody write you down a list of the top. You decide how many episodes you want to watch, and somebody will just give you the top 5 list. And then you're guaranteed you're going to watch 5 reasonable kind of standalone TV movie type of things. That's it.
What about you guys?
I mean, even though it's murdery, it's not gruesome or really violent in any way.
Yeah.
It's almost, like Paul says, sort of comforting and charming, and something that's, what's the word that I'm looking for? Just, it's like there's some safety in it, and it has a real sort of appeal to it and a charm. And I like the character, but because I'm more willing to believe that he is a homeless hobo who's making this up all in his head, or he's like a psych ward patient or something, because I still want to know who Columbo is outside of this role. He's always playing a role. He's always on, whether it's talking to the wife, talking to the murderer. There's no other police people he seems to. Maybe I just forget them. So I don't know who the real guy is. I'd be interested in more in like elaborating on that a bit and getting deeper behind that veil. But because I don't think that ever happens, and because I don't think there is any development where you're like, oh my God, what a great reveal about Columbo and his character, I don't know if I'd be necessarily drawn back. I think it's like Paul Sykes says, it's fun, kind of a popcorn chomping. Oh my God, it's not 2 hours and 40 minutes of Skyfall. So for that, I'm super grateful that it was only 75 minutes. I think you could have trimmed out 15 and you wouldn't have missed a beat. I don't think that a lot of the scenes were like establishing this like mood necessarily, but it didn't bother me, and I don't have anything better to do. So it didn't, like, I wasn't like, oh man, I could have spent that time in a lot more productive ways. I got to finish up that cabinet I've been building. Like that wasn't something that was distracting me from, but I did like him. I just think that where do you go with that character? And I kind of don't think it goes anywhere. But you recommend one more episode. I'd probably watch one more episode if you've got something in the chamber there for me. Unlike the unloaded gun at the beginning of this episode where there were no bullets in it, and Jim knew it.
Yeah, that's because he's one of the one half of the greatest crime writing series That was the other thing. Oh, you're forgetting that I'm a detective writer. It's like, anyone can tell when somebody's finger isn't on the trigger, but never mind. No, I'm grateful to you guys for watching it and indulging me in it. And I could certainly send you, Ryan, on request, a list of specific episodes for you to watch, were you so inclined to watch them in future. But comforting is the absolute thing for me. I'm not afraid to admit that I have all 69 episodes of Columbo on a box set that I bought about 10 years ago. And I bought it particularly, it was around one Christmas. I was like, Christmas gift to myself. I wasn't feeling very well. And I was like, I'm going to be sitting on the couch not feeling well for the next couple of days. So I'm just going to watch a load of Columbo episodes.
That's the perfect time to do it.
Yeah, it was great. Although I did find after 8 or 9 hours of solid Columbo viewing, it's certainly, you do go into a different, you got a bit of a fever as well. You go into a very different sort of, a different place and time. But, it was an enjoyable time. It's not a time I necessarily wish to revisit.
I would just watch all the Jack Cassidy episodes back to back. So if Paul Sykes isn't aware, Jack Cassidy does come back in several more episodes, 2 or 3, I have no idea, as different murderers, but he's still the murderer every time. But they'll paste a mustache onto him, or probably give him a goatee at some point.
Is his performance the exact same with a mustache, or is it like a? Oh, it is. Okay.
It's the thing is, when he has the mustache, he gets a bit hammy. Seriously, the next episode he's in is called Publish or Perish. I think it's actually a better episode than this.
Okay.
It's still set in the publishing world.
Yeah, exactly.
They're really going to the well on this.
Yeah. And when he is caught, because obviously Columbo catches him, when he is caught, his reaction to it is absolutely fantastic. It's definitely worth seeing. If you are going to watch one more Jack Cassidy episode, that would be worth watching.
Sweet, I'll watch that.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. I guess this about wraps up our discussion here on our Columbo cast. I do want to say I love Jack Cassidy's performance. Every part of it was so fun. It makes no sense. It's so over the top. It's not subtle in the slightest way. But I think maybe that's what part of the appeal, hopefully, of this show is as well, is that you've got this rotating series of like kind of TV actor guys, movie of the week kind of guys who come in, and then they're just like, I'm just going to let my freak flag fly and just get as crazy as I want with this thing. And basically just mustache twirl the entire time. And that was the best part. The Columbo part, like, here's Columbo. But I kind of like seeing the villain and Jack Cassidy being just so pleased with himself. That was great. So overall, I would watch another Columbo, but I don't think I'm going to do another Columbo podcast necessarily. I think we got it. And I really want to thank Paul Murphy for bringing this, putting this on our radar, giving us something interesting to talk about. Now
it was fun doing something that wasn't Bond.
Oh, it's so nice to do something that's not Bond. And so, Paul, we'll keep you in mind for our next upcoming, discussion that it presumably is going to be something North American and equally as terrible. Like Paul Murphy watches the A-Team and gives us his or whatever.
I can give you my take on the A-Team. I watched that for years.
Oh, you did?
I think
okay, we got to find
this
something.
This Hunter thing sounds good. I'm going to go away and watch an episode this week of Hunter. I've decided.
Okay, well that sounds like it's next up on the docket for us here at I'm a Man, I'm 40. So thanks to everybody out there for joining us for our Columbo cast. That's all I got for you. We'll see you next time when we talk about a 3-episode arc where Hunter dispatches justice the only way he knows how, with the 44 Magnum.
Works for me.
I don't know. I got nothing. All right, thanks guys.
See you
next time.
Cheers.
Columbo.